to, and here we are live and talking to Dan and Joe. So it's let me get this right: Daniel Suk and Joe Wong, and this is the book "Make Meaningful Work," which is actually a very easy read, and I have read it. It's a very easy read for how to go from sleepwalking to sparkle in your working life. But that's not the reason that you're here today, is it? The reason you're here today is because we had a chat the other day about Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. And I said, would you come on the show and do this again? Let's have the same chat. So that's why we're here today. So thank you very much, Dan and Joe, for the second time on Jerry's Take on China. Welcome aboard.
Thank you for having us. Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Jerry. It's our pleasure to be here.
And I think it's probably something that we should, in transparency, in the spirit of openness, expose that we are actually friends. We've met. I've been to Hong Kong and met you, and just last week you were in Zhongshan to meet with me and Anne. You met Anne finally after all this time, and we speak a lot online, but this is only the second time. So we're going to talk about Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. And I've got a few general questions and then a few specific questions that I'd like to put to you. Now, first one, which I think is kind of a personalized question. Did you see the comment from Stephen Roach about Hong Kong becoming Chinafied? There is a danger that Hong Kong could become Chinafied. Now, I'm going to, first of all, I want to go to Joe for this one, because Joe, you are Chinese. You're born in the mainland, right? But lived in Hong Kong most of your life. So you are Chinese. Is there a danger of Hong Kong becoming Chinafied, in your opinion?
I'm trying very hard not to laugh.
Okay, it's okay to laugh. I don't mind.
I don't know how to put this. Well, for the past probably 20 years, when I started to notice about these mainstream media, when I see the word China, next to it is a lot of the times are negative words.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear...
This is Hong Kong press.
This is not Hong Kong press, not just Hong Kong press. We're talking about all these international mass media.
Okay.
I started, believe it or not, I used to be subscribers of those before digital time. So the paper version of those newspapers. So I'm very interested in finance stuff, so I subscribe to those papers. And I started to realize a lot of the times when you see the word China or related words, within a very short distance, you will see negative words. Mm. So when I hear headlines like that, it's almost like, yeah, another one of those.
So what does Chinafied mean? I mean, the way I view Hong Kong is most of it is a peninsula on the end of Guangdong, and some of it is a few islands off the coast of Guangdong. How is it possible to be Chinafied? Or maybe he's afraid that it's becoming less Anglo-sized.
I think we probably need to ask him, what does he mean? Hong Kong is a Chinese society, and I don't understand what he means.
Okay. Dan, what do you think?
Chinafied. Yeah. Well, if Chinafied means becoming more deeply immersed in a Chinese culture, then bring it on.
Okay.
Because
you're not afraid of this being a foreigner living in Hong Kong?
No, because I don't look at it through one narrow lens or one dimension of whatever Mr. Roach means by Chinafied. There's so many beautiful aspects of China as a culture and China as a country. And you could look at language, history, literature, food, diversity across provinces, the model of thinking from the Chinese, creativity, innovation, and certainly what we've seen roughly in the last 20 to 30 years, we're on the cusp of something very, very special. And a country that, from what I've seen, it's remained consistent in its policies, that is looking to, in reference to using the word, I'll just use the word because he uses the word, a model in which the Chinafication means a peaceful model. And so I think Hong Kong as one city or a special administrative region as part of Mother China, mainland China, can only benefit and has benefited. There'd be a lot more problems here if China wasn't supporting Hong Kong in the way that it has been. So I don't look at Chinafied or being Chinafied or being personally Chinafied as a problem. I look at it as bring it on. Wonderful.
Yeah, me too. There were a lot of fears during the handover period, and the way I view this is most of those fears were fears that were kind of implanted in our brains, including mine, for many, many years, that China was some kind of evil dictatorship, authoritarian, all that kind of stuff. And the fear was that they would just barge into Hong Kong and take it all over. Well, of course, I think that's been proven wrong. Those fears have been proven for most Hong Kongers to be quite unfounded, in my opinion.
Go
ahead, please do.
Yeah, I'll give you another perspective. I think when people is this narrow perspective about Hong Kong that is comparable to the rest of China, it sounds almost laughable as well. Hong Kong is a very small place compared to the rest of China.
Yes.
Since even before Hong Kong reunified with China, the Chinese central government has a lot of work to do. And somehow there are people believe that the Chinese central government will use all of their power to destroy this place. And I don't know. I just don't think it makes any sense at all.
Well, you've thought that way a long time. It's never made sense to you, this line of thinking, or this
us
sort
and them.
Yeah, this sort of logic of the central government just wanting to do post handover everything that it can to destroy Hong Kong. I mean, why would they want to do that?
Yeah, that's very true. Now, the way I view it, which will lead us into our next question, that PB World said they could have barged in the 50s. They most certainly could, but didn't. It would have started some kind of conflict back then, quite sure. And I think there were some people who wanted them to do it. I think at that time Russia wanted them to do it, and Mao said, no, we've got to do this properly. That's my historical understanding of it. But what I think Stephen Roach was thinking about, now Stephen Roach is a former CEO of one of the big financial institutions. I think it was Morgan Stanley, but one of the big ones anyway. And so he has quite an influence in Hong Kong, but I think he lived in a different world to normal people. Can I say that? To the people who just had normal daytime jobs, went to work every day, went home. he lived in the colonial era. He would have had servants. He would have probably gone to work, if not in a Rolls Royce, then in the backseat of a Mercedes or something like that. And he would have had a pretty good lifestyle in Hong Kong that the colonialists at the top of the food tree would have enjoyed very, very much, I'm sure. And that's what I see that he's afraid of is now being lost or has been lost to those kinds of people. There are still some very, very rich people in Hong Kong, and some of them are foreigners, and they still have that kind of lifestyle and will maintain that kind of lifestyle for a long time. But then it brings us to the next point, where the UK government has encouraged 2 of the British judges to move out. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I personally have very mixed feelings on it. And I talked to Nuri Vitashi about it the other day, and he felt there was some negative about that. What about your thoughts? Dan, do you want to go first this time?
Okay.
I went ladies first last time.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, when I was at university and I studied at Melbourne University, that's where I met Joe for the first time. We could choose a major. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, I chose law as my major, or legal as my major.
Yeah.
So I think that had very little to do perhaps with the law, or maybe it had a lot to do with the law, in that I think I have a very strong value of looking at people, that people are in fact treated equally, that there's an equality. And I think that's part of what the law should be doing and protecting as a fundamental. And part of what I studied was, I guess it was the common law. So it was the English law that had a influence, obviously, on Hong Kong, case law and precedents and so on and so forth, and had an influence clearly on Australia and other countries in the Commonwealth. And so when it comes to the legal system, and it comes to judges within a legal system, if the judges are trained in the appropriate manner and have the appropriate experience, it shouldn't really matter actually whether they're white or any other colour, or British or any other colour. If they're trained in the law and they're following precedent within the law and they have experience within the law, then a judge should be able to judge independent of where they're from. So that's one aspect of it. And another aspect of it is maybe it's a good thing, in that maybe because humans are influenced by bias, all sorts of biases that we're often not aware of. I mean, there are hundreds of them. Maybe there is some inherent bias in some of these judges who have a foot in pre-handover and a foot in post-handover. Maybe there's an opportunity for these judges to move out of the way and introduce new judges or fresh faces that can look at the civil law and criminal law and other flavours of law in new and diverse and interesting ways.
Yeah. Joe, do you have any comments on it? Good or bad?
I'm not a legal. I don't have any legal background, but I can't comment from that perspective. But I think it's about time that we have less colonial flavor to Hong Kong, because there are so many people trying to hang on onto that time. I think it's about time for us to move on.
Yeah, perhaps. Nuri, and my view on this, I'm a little mixed on it, and I can see that coming from both of you, because there is fundaments of the law, and I am kind of semi-legally trained. I don't have a bachelor's degree or master's or anything like that in law, but I was trained in criminology and criminality. I spent 10 years in a prison. No, I didn't. But yeah, as a former police officer, you learn a lot of law, and then I went into contract law, and I had a lot of exposure to contract laws. The thing is there are written laws, and they need to be interpreted. And the way those British judges, generally speaking, do it has lifted Hong Kong to one of the highest places in the pecking order of judicial systems. Hong Kong is very, very high. It has freedoms. It has all the things that America says that they're fighting to bring to places. Hong Kong is actually already higher than America in all of them. And one of them was a freedom of judiciary or an independent judiciary. So in that respect, I think it's probably a bad thing that they are all leaving. But I guess if, in my opinion, if a judge doesn't want to be in Hong Kong, then they have a very good reason, and they probably should leave anyway. So
if it's a robust system, if the system itself is robust enough, it means that there's a high probability that the system itself will scale and sustain. And the way it will scale and sustain is based on the quality of the people that are in the legal system, including the judges. So if they leave and then they're replaced by equal, if not better, quality people, whether they're English or not, the system will continue to work.
Yeah. And this is also a great point that a lot of people are making. You know, how many countries in the world have foreign judges sitting in their highest court? But you know, some of them are doing an excellent job, and this is actually the one redeeming fact that the Americans, in their negative press about Hong Kong, cannot overcome. British judges, New Zealand, Australian judges are sitting in judgment on some of these Hong Kong protesters. They're not mentioning that in the media, that the judge is actually from another country, one of their Western democracy countries, an ally of the US, because that's where they're all from. So in that respect, I think it's quite a good thing that we have them there for the time being. Which leads us to the next question that I had for you, and that is, there are people who say that the national security law negatively impacts on Hong Kong people in China, or Chinese people in Hong Kong people who are now part of China. How does the national security law impact on you as a couple who live in Hong Kong? Who wants to go first?
Well, I remember the day that the national security law was like effective on the 1st of July.
Sounds right.
I felt safer because that's preventing all those rioters smashing shops around Hong Kong, burning people and just smash things in people's businesses. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think it's a positive thing.
You agree, Dan?
Yeah, ever since that, nothing like that happened.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with that. It's interesting, Jerry, because we've been touching on it so far. What are we? Nearly 20 minutes in to the conversation, and we've been sort of touching and prodding away at something that sort of thematically runs through a lot of what we're talking about so far. And what that is I would describe it as this constant double standard that is applied to pretty much most topics to do with China, as compared to anyone else, or China and Chinese as compared to anyone else, or policies that are happening as compared to anyone else. So national security is a perfect example of that. Why aren't there protests about national security in all the other countries that have national security? And why is there a double standard associated with, if people go to the airport and they go through security checks, you don't see a lot of people protesting about that.
No.
If you live in an estate and you have gates protecting the housing estate and you have guards at the bottom of towers protecting people's security in the estate, you don't see a lot of people complaining about that either. If you've got CCTV cameras, and there are a lot of them in places like London, and not only London, you don't see a lot of people complaining about that either. Or if you've got security at schools where your kids might go to school. So you get my point. I mean, I could keep going and going. So why are we questioning security in this instance as it pertains to Hong Kong? Yeah. The thing that people can't seem to get their head around, and I think it's time that they at least attempted to let this go, is Hong Kong is a city and or a special administrative region that is now part of China. It is Hong Kong, China. And so therefore, if the country of China has a national security law, why would a place like Hong Kong be exempt from that? I didn't see a lot of problems in Macau when it came to the national security law.
Not at all.
That's it. So when little things like this come up, we've got to look at two things. One is, and you've mentioned this before, Jerry, to us, and I think you've mentioned it on other shows with other people. It's a day by day constant flow and barrage of anti-China sentiment, constantly. It's called propaganda, right? And it's happening all the time. And then, as I said before, then it's this this double standard that almost starts to feel like, not almost, it to me feels like racism, just plain and simple. Yeah. And so sometimes people it's like this Mr. Roach, they live such a privileged existence within a bubble that they think is Hong Kong that isn't Hong Kong, and they may not even, I mean, I'm not here to talk about this particular person because I don't really know him, but there are people that they grow up with such privilege that the way they behave to people that are not of that world, they don't even realise that they're looking down on them, or they're behaving badly, or they're racist in their rhetoric. They don't even realise that they're being that way because they haven't really been exposed to anyone outside of their bubble.
That's a good point. Joe?
I saw some comments in the chat talking about education in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I remember our conversation in Zhongshan, one meal conversation with you and Anne. I can't remember who else was there. Talking about the TV shows we watch growing up, right? The content when I grew up in Hong Kong about China is limited in schools, but it's even less on TV. Like we get all these shows from the UK, the US, Japan, and then later on Korea, all these different things from all over. We hardly see anything from China.
That's interesting.
I think that's why it's so easily using these fear. What's the word?
Fear-mongering.
Yeah.
Fear tactics.
To manipulate these people, because we hardly know anything about the mainland.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we switch our TV on or we go to watch a movie, we think we're being entertained. And we are, but we're also being propagandized at the same time. And I don't think there's much question about that. I don't think there's any country in the world that doesn't do it. I'm sure China does too. I'm not going to make excuses there. The fact is they want to show their country in a better light, so they do. But this is a very big Hollywood thing, showing the American as the big heroes, freedom fighters, et cetera, et cetera. And the good guys always win, and the bad guys always lose, and the bad guys always look ugly, and the good guys are always handsome. This is how it's done. And nowadays, the bad guys are always Chinese, and a few years ago, the bad guys were always Arabs or Muslims. And this is where it comes down to the fact that we get propagandized in our own entertainment. I want to go back to the national security law thing, because Joe, I think you made a really great point when you said, I didn't feel, I felt safer the day it was implemented because you wouldn't get the damage and the violence and the protests. Well, protests have always been allowed, even since handover. Before handover, protests were not allowed under the British. They used to shoot people who protested in Hong Kong. Now, this is something that gets forgotten about. The 1010 riots, the Star Ferry riots, there was riots in the 1950s and the 1960s, and literally hundreds of people have been shot by the British military in Hong Kong trying to get some form of democracy, some form, and sometimes there were industrial relations incidents, which strikes, which turned into the military coming out and shooting people. That's how it was. Then you say, I felt safe because we couldn't do that. But there's always been laws against that damage, the violence, the setting fire to people, and they're not national security laws. And someone made the comment in here, and it's gone up now, so I won't search through for it, but the comment was a good one. It said, of course, NSL was good because Radio Free Asia couldn't leave fast enough. That's what NSL did. It stopped people from getting influenced, getting paid, and motivated, sometimes even trained for doing those things. So I think that's, for me anyway, from this perspective. And certainly I've been to Hong Kong many, many times, and I haven't noticed any changes in the freedoms. It doesn't look like there's any problems in your freedoms. And Hong Kong still registers higher than the United States on the Freedom Index, which is an interesting thing. Should we move on to the GBA, which is really what we came in to talk about? But thank you for your insights into living in Hong Kong today. I've had a couple of videos about the GBA, and the reason for this is because it's the 5th year. 6 years ago, no one had ever heard of the GBA. Everybody, well, not everybody, a lot of people knew what the PRD was, which was the Pearl River Delta. And then it suddenly became the GBA, the Greater Bay Area. What's the difference? And have you noticed anything where you live in the last 5 years since the GBA came into existence? Dan, first this time?
I first visited Hong Kong in 1995, and then came again in 1997. Coming from Melbourne, Australia, Hong Kong in itself was absolutely fascinating.
Exciting.
Unbelievable. Like, I just thought, I've never seen anything like this place. The pace of it, the energy, the people, it was the food, the efficiency, which it just felt, in many respects, felt like, a lot of it felt like everything that Australia wasn't.
Right.
And it really felt very much like the heart of Asia. There was a lot of mix of culture going on, and there still is today in Hong Kong. So China at that time was you'd visit Hong Kong, and then China felt like another place that you would visit.
Yeah.
So my first trip to China, I think, was Beijing. I went to Beijing, and that was absolutely mind-blowing as well. And then when I moved here in 1999, we would make trips together across the border. It was kind of talked about across the border. You'd go to Shenzhen across the border. That was kind of the language that was used. So it still very much felt like the mental model of it still felt very much not like a segregation, but it felt like there was somewhat of a boundary between Hong Kong and China, and Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And then I went to eventually beyond Shenzhen. I went to Guangzhou, and then you start seeing a few more parts of southern China. As the GBA was introduced, it came through in a series of conversations with friends that we have and business associates, and we got to learn more and more about what was happening in terms of high tech, in terms of finance, in terms of integration. As at today, it almost seems like month to month, the integration just feels like it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger, to the point where it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm going across the border now to Shenzhen. It just starts to feel like one region, like one big one. Instead of Hong Kong being a playground, it starts to feel like one big playground. So you sort of, you hop on a ferry and suddenly you're in Zhongshan. You get on a train and suddenly you're on a high-speed train from Hong Kong, and then you're in another city in the GBA.
You now have a high-speed train direct to Beijing, right?
Exactly. So the infrastructural integration, integrative, if that's such a word, the integration of it is just feeling stronger and stronger and stronger. And so I think it's sort of coming back to, sorry to use the word again, the Chinafied aspect of it. I think the integration is beautiful. Because I think what it does, especially for, I would say, a considerable amount of people living in Hong Kong, it just makes the playground feel a lot bigger. So there are plenty of Hong Kong Chinese now that are zipping to Shenzhen, like very, very quickly. They might go and shop there. They might have things delivered into Hong Kong. They might go and wine and dine, or certainly dine in Shenzhen. It doesn't feel like what it felt like 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago, where people would look down on across the border. It's not like that at all anymore.
Right. Joe, what do you think about it?
I think it's a natural integration, because I don't think Hong Kong should just be isolated forever. And so I saw some comments about what is GBA and stuff like that. GBA is the mainly in Canton, right?
It's not all of Guangdong, no.
It's not all of Guangdong. So it's roughly including around 11 cities.
Yeah.
And around 70 million people population.
I think it's 110 million, but.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought it's really. Anyways, I think it's something good for everybody, because you already see some Hong Kong retired people living inside Canton area already, and as we integrated into the bigger Bay Area, GBA, Hong Kong actually allowed some older people who are enjoying the health benefits in Hong Kong, that you get to use those subsidies in China, which is great, because for older people, if they already moved there for their retirement, and you need to come to Hong Kong and see the doctors and stuff, it's not that convenient. And also you see a lot more driving license integration. We can now apply for driving from Hong Kong all the way to Macau and then Zhuhai. I think that bridge is about to open. That's connects.
Actually, I think this bridge is the Hong Kong Macau Zhuhai bridge. I think. I'm not 100% certain. I just went looking for a Hong Kong bridge. I wanted the Hong Kong Zhongshan bridge, but I couldn't find a good picture, because it's the Hong Kong Zhongshan bridge is not open yet. It literally is days away from opening, and I was invited to an official ceremony more than a week ago, 10 or 12 days ago, and it absolutely poured with rain. And it was supposed to be a tree planting ceremony, and I just said no. It was mostly for the kids anyway. So some of my friends went, but I cancelled my attendance at it. And that was basically the opening of the bridge. But this one, I think that you can see behind me, this goes from Hong Kong Airport into Hong Kong city center, and then across 67 kilometers of the mouth of the Pearl River, and then it peels off. And that's why I think this is the Hong Kong one, because it peels off and goes to Macau, as well as then comes straight ahead into Zhuhai. And Macau and Zhuhai are joined on the other side of the river. Macau is a peninsula of Zhuhai, the city. And you come off this and you go through they don't call it the border control. They call it an ID check or something like that, because there's no border. So we have to be careful of our wording here, because we'll offend our Chinese friends on the mainland when we say there's a border. They say, no, there's not a border. It's an ID check. Okay, right, there's an ID check there. And then you're only 40 minutes away from where I live. But you did it the other way. You caught the ferry when you came in here. So there's another way. There's a high-speed ferry, which used to be built in Australia. There used to be Austral ferries on that route, but now there's I think it's a Finnish company are building the ferries. Were they comfortable? They were very comfortable, very high speed.
I recommend it very highly if you want just like the most stunning view of the Hong Kong harbour, going all the way past Lantau Island as it goes through, and then you get this unbelievable cityscape of.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you get the bridge that you're describing to Macau, and then as you're coming to Zhongshan, pardon me, you start to see some of the new bridge, and that's the thing. I think that plays into quite a lot of what we're talking about today as well. Is that there are very, very old views of China still at play, and I would just recommend anyone that if you have the time and the means, just come and visit, and you'll just see it for yourself. I'm just going to hand back to Jo, because I'm not sure she finished.
I haven't. When I first heard about the GBA and all the plans, it was in place, and now I can see how it's almost like implementing and coming true. It's very impressive. They have been talking about this 1 hour living circle. It means that you can go to work and travel back to your place with all these infrastructures that it's been built. It's so convenient now. It's just unbelievable. And for people, I think, living in other parts of the world, you can't imagine. You just have to come and see it yourself.
Yeah. It is true. It has to be seen to be believed. The entire area. I want to just touch on this question, because I think this is an important one. A lot of people have some views about travel around. In general, you from Hong Kong can come to the mainland anytime you want, but you need Dan, you needed a visa because you're Australian, right?
Yep.
But Jo, you don't need a visa. You can come and go as you please. Is that correct?
I have a card. So apart from my Hong Kong ID, I have another kind of a visa, but it lasts for 10 years.
Okay. All right.
Apply for another card called Withholding.
So there are some restrictions, and there's a very good reason for this. I once asked the question, and I was in the immigration department asking it, and I said, why can't Chinese people just travel to Hong Kong? And the answer was, imagine if they all wanted to go on the same day. I never thought about that. They've got to limit the number of people that Hong Kong can hold. And at that time, it was huge. This was pre-2019 protests, and they had tens of thousands of tourists, day tourists, shopping in Hong Kong. And you must have seen them, where they just jump off a bus and go into a shop, And, I can see why they got a bit of a bad reputation. These tourist corporations that were milking them all for what they were worth, and they really were milking them. I watched them sometimes. It was really, really bad. Thousands and thousands of tourists arriving and then just jumping onto a bus and going to the next spot. And it wasn't a very nice way. Now, can mainlanders go to the Macau casinos? The answer is yes, they can. But there are restrictions, and mainlanders do need a permit to travel across the ID check, the border. So they do need a permit to go across. If you are a government official, government officials can only visit Macau a limited number of times each year, and they must have a reason to go. And the reason for that is because up until about 15 years ago, a lot of Chinese government officials were taking their money and going to Macau for a bit of fun and spending government money. So there was a lot of corruption in China 15, 20, and more years ago. In the last 12 years, that's all changed. So now there are restrictions, but generally speaking, if you want to go, if you have a reason to go, you can go. And if you have no government connections, my wife has a cousin who lives over there. She can go as often as she wants to. It's no big deal at all. So yeah, there are some restrictions on traveling around. And you mentioned the 1 hour circle. I want to clarify that. When they open the bridge to Shenzhen, they say the journey from Zhongshan to Shenzhen is only 20 minutes. Well, it takes me 40 minutes to get to the bridge. Then it takes me 20 minutes to get to Shenzhen. Now, depending on where I want to go in Shenzhen, it could be an hour and a half away. So my journey could still be a 3, 4, or even 5-hour journey from Zhongshan into Shenzhen. But if I was to go from southern Zhongshan across to southeastern Shenzhen by car today before the new bridge, it's going to take me many hours. And it could take as long as 3 or 4 hours just to get across one bridge, which is way, way north of here. We have to travel almost all the way to Guangzhou, cross the bridge, and then go all the way through Dongguan to get into Shenzhen. So the bridge, when it opens, is going to shorten that time, but it's never going to be 20 minutes from my house to my friend's house in Shenzhen. So that's something that needs to be put into perspective. Go on,
Well,
Dan.
you need to look it up. I think the concept was about people who live in the GBA. You are able to have a very convenient like work and living place within an hour of your circle.
Yeah.
I don't think it's about traveling from one place to another.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Even Canton, you can't from one end to the other end. You can't travel within an hour.
Oh no.
Yeah.
You talk about Canton. When you say Canton, do you mean Guangdong or Guangzhou?
Guangdong, the whole
Guangdong.
province.
The whole province. Oh, the province is massive. It's
Exactly.
it's bigger than England. Another interesting fact that a lot of people don't know about the Greater Bay Area, the GBA, is that the GDP of the GBA alone, just the 11 cities that are involved in it, is enough to put it into the middle of the G7 in terms of regional GDPs. So that's pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. Now, the next question. I've got my questions written down. Are there any benefits? I think we've already covered that. Now let's go to the next question. How do you think the one country, two systems principle helps the people of Hong Kong? Now we're going to talk about the benefits of being in Hong Kong as opposed to the mainland.
I think the benefits Hong Kong has was that nothing much changed. You just run the place like we used to be. And also Hong Kong has a lot of benefits for being part of China. You do a lot of businesses there. And I think the convenience of doing financial stuff here is the most convenient for me.
Mm. You're talking about international finance.
Yeah, anything you can buy, sell shares in Hong Kong, in China, outside of Hong Kong. You can invest in a lot of financial products, currencies. We don't have any restrictions on currencies. Usually, you open up a bank account. It comes with a multi-currency account that you don't need to worry about who's giving you what currency, or when you travel, when you don't have to worry about I have to spend all these foreign currencies or convert it back.
Which is something the mainland doesn't have. That is definitely. I've complained a lot about the financial systems inside of China because I get paid a pension from the UK. I've got money in Australia. I live in China, and it's very difficult to get sometimes.
I liken a little bit to this, Jerry. When I travelled more internationally, and I'd fly, of course, I would be flying with Cathay Pacific, and I fly other airlines as well.
Of course you
But
do. Yeah.
there was a time where I was travelling quite a lot, if you recall, Joe, and then, you know, when you check in, if you're lucky, they'll say, "Oh, you've been upgraded," because that's what they do. They'll upgrade you to sort of entice you to experience the next level, and you go from economy. It wasn't economy to premium. It was actually to business, and it's a world of difference. And then suddenly you get a taste of business class, and you think, "Geez, I wonder what first class is like." You know, so you get what happens is, and I think it's quite a human trait. What happens is, once you have experienced good things, you want more good things, and then you forget how good the good things are around you. And I feel like that's Hong Kong.
Right.
There are so many good things that we forget how good they are. We've got low tax. We've got predominantly a very good government. And like we can complain about the servicing here at times, you know, and getting stuff done, but it's still very, very good. The finance side, Joe's covered off. The safety is awesome. Even during the troubled political times that were instigated by outside money and outside forces, even at that time when the shit was really hitting the fan here, it was still predominantly a very safe city overall, even when things were not great.
Yes, just staying away from that street.
Yeah, well, that's it. So it's a wonderful travel hub. You can get to most places around the world pretty quickly.
It's a free pot.
It's a free, and so on and so forth, right? So, and then I have moments where I have to deal with something from Australia, like, for example, renewing or getting them to deliver my new driver's license.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, why is this taking me 4 or 5 times simply for them to deliver a license by post to international? And so it's not that all the servicing in a country like Australia is crap. It's just you get so used to it being so good. Everything, most things being so. Diversity of food, diversity of culture, the travel in and out of, just if you want to go in and out of China, it's brilliant. So I could keep going. So sometimes I think we should be working for the Hong Kong tourism. So you get used to that, for lack of a better word, that privilege, that really great lifestyle that you can have here. And I'm not talking about having to be very rich to enjoy those things. I mean, the Hong Kong government have done a pretty good job of making things pretty good for a lot of the people. Now, probably one of the biggest downsides of Hong Kong that they do need to fix is the properties, in terms of the property moguls.
I've got another note here to ask you about this, because Hong Kong is the 5th most expensive city in the world to buy property. And interestingly, the top 4 are equally tied. So it's effectively the 2nd most expensive. But before we answer that question, how much is Hong Kong tax?
Okay, I can give you a quick table.
Please. Yeah.
The first layer is if you earn 50,000, that's Hong Kong dollar, 2%. And then the next level is up another 100,000, that's 6%. And then the next 150,000 is 10%. And then the next layer is 14%. The highest is 17.
70% is the highest tax level.
Yeah,
17. Yeah,
so
17.
anything you earn above 200,000 Hong Kong is 17%.
Wow.
So below that, you still pay less.
Yeah. So is 200,000 Hong Kong dollars a viable living wage? I mean, it would be huge here.
For a single person, probably a bit tight, but manageable.
Mm. So if there's a couple and they're each earning 200,000?
Each, if you have a couple each 200 grand, you're okay.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting.
That's something hard to get a property. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think someone here knows you, Dan.
Okay.
Someone here knows you. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I like Hong Kong dim sum, you mean?
Yeah, that's you.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to talk about property. I just saw that and thought, that's you.
It is, absolutely. So the property, just on the property side, Hong Kong, like any place around the world, there are still things that need to be improved. Absolutely. Things that need to be improved. But interestingly, the things that are the examples of the things that need to improve are often things where the most rampant and toxic forms of capitalism have taken hold. So, so we need the government, and I think this would be fantastic for all governments around the world, to continue to be representative of its people, and ensuring that everybody, coming back to equitable, making sure that there are policies and laws in place for everybody to have a good life. And Hong Kong gets a lot of that right, but on the property side of it, there was way too much influence from property tycoons. And there were times where chief executives, I mean, Joe knows more about this than I do, but there were times historically post-handover, we've had chief executives who have attempted to address that.
First,
through Tung Chee-Hwa was the first CE that looked to address that in terms of more public housing, but it was all a lot of that was shut down. There was a lot of pressure from big business,
the wealthy people,
because there's no, if you're a capitalist in the true sense of the word, there is never enough, unless there's regulation in place to control that.
I believe that back before around 2019, that was one of the factors where people were legitimately protesting, before it turned into the color revolution that it turned into. I want to bring this comment up from, it came up, I've just lost it. Hang on. Oh gosh, it's gone. It said, the comment said that Macau's only industry is gambling. And here it is. Macau's only industry is gambling, which is, it's a question. So terrible. Yes, if that was Macau's only industry, that would be terrible, but it's not. Do you know what else Macau has got to offer? I know you're Hong Kongers, but not necessarily have a great expertise on this.
They offer quite a good education for many kids come from outside of Macau.
Yeah, I know a lot of students who've gone to Macau for education. from here. Yeah, that's true.
Getting doing quite well.
Yeah. The big one that I'm aware of, and it's much bigger than people realize, is traditional medicine. It's huge in Macau. And they do a lot of work with the Portuguese speaking world. So I didn't realize this until quite recently. There are a lot of Portuguese speaking countries in the world, in Africa and in South America, or the biggest one is Brazil, of course. And Brazil has rainforest. Rainforest has resources. Macau and Brazil have a very, very big industry going with traditional medicine. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize, because we think of the only industry there as being gambling, but tourism is huge too. However, tourism is connected to the gambling, but inside of the gambling halls, you've got Cirque du Soleil and things like that happening there. So there is a lot of tourism.
I think there are a lot of events and entertainment stuff going on as well.
It's also great. There's a lot of great food in Macau. There's a rich culture there.
Yes, I mean, I've been to Portugal many years ago. I mean, I think I was at Portugal about the year you were being born, Dan. I mean, that's how long ago it was. And Joe, you were just an apple in the eye. But my first trip to Portugal, I loved the food there. Then I found myself in Macau about 20 years ago going, wow. And also the buildings, some of the buildings took me back to 1970 something anyway, a long time ago.
You know, Jerry, just a thought came to my mind. We were talking about a lot of these topics, and as you were touching on Macau, and Joe was talking about Hong Kong and Macau and China, and for the people watching, they might get this impression from both of us, and I would expect from you as well, that we tend to lean a little more towards an uplifting and positive view of China, and I would say the region, and certainly Hong Kong. And it's not that everything is rosy, right? So there are plenty of negatives that we could be talking about.
Of course, yeah.
It's just that
anyone else can do that. Let's stick with the positives.
That's it. So we're swimming against a pretty strong tide here, and a lot of that, the negative aspect of that tide is very intentional and deliberate. Yeah. And so there are many powers that really do not want the China model to succeed. And I think I can speak for Joe and for you here, unless I can't, that we just intentionally choose not to buy into that crap. Yeah. And I think China, we're at a really interesting point in history globally, where China can really provide a different path going forward in pretty much everything. If people, this is sort of a message for people watching, if people just can allow themselves a little bit of leeway and a little bit of adaptability and flexibility, just to look at things, as Joe often says to me, just allow yourself to look at things from multiple perspectives. And if you don't know, watch Jerry's take on China, watch other news sources, read other newspapers, find a friend who lives in China, and get other perspectives. Because I think if you do that, if you grow that in your learnings and in your research, you're definitely going to walk away knowing a whole lot more by just falling into the trap of the negativity.
Yes, and one of the people that you should watch if you want to learn about China is up there right now, Reports on China. This is Andy Borum. And Andy's in Shanghai, and Andy doesn't speak Cantonese. Joe, nei sekong ba wa ma? Sekong. Ta sekong? Sekong. Oim sekong. Seteng susu. Dan sekong ba? No. So we're not going to go. We're not going to go into our Cantonese because mine is really limited. But I do speak a functional Mandarin. I can get by in Mandarin. You're frozen. Are you still there?
Yeah, we're still here.
Okay,
Can
I
you hear us?
That's good. Yeah, I can hear you, but your picture has frozen.
Should I stop the camera and start it again? Would that help?
No, I don't think that'll help. But it's frozen on a great picture.
It is.
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's a perfect picture. So Andy doesn't speak Cantonese, and when he comes to Guangdong, I'd love to ask Andy if you want to tell me this. Yeah. Hang on. Someone says Jerry has a Westerner's accent. Why would that be? Because I'm a Westerner. Andy, when you come to Guangdong and you speak Mandarin, does everyone speak Mandarin back at you? So while we're waiting, we've lost you. So this is an interesting question or interesting point. I wish Cantonese was a language. I think my wife would be happy about that too. Yeah, definitely. It's widely spoken around here. And Andy's come back with, yep, they all speak Mandarin back. So it is good to know that people around China can speak Mandarin. What about this? Is Mandarin, Andy, is Mandarin a dull language? I should bring Andy up here and interview him now, because I think we have lost Dan and Joe, hopefully not for too long. But Mandarin is okay. I have to agree with you here. Mandarin is awesome. I wish I could speak more of it, but I came to China not really planning on staying in China. And for 8 months, I didn't speak it because I was going to leave at the end of my contract. After my contract finished and I decided I wanted to stay here, I got a job in a language center, which was what they call an immersion center. So everybody had to speak English. And for the next 2 years, that's pretty much all I spoke. Oh, so I'm not going to send you the link, Andy. So because this is the last thing I want to see. I'm sure everybody else would love to see it, but no. You don't know what I'm wearing underneath the desk. So I think probably now that, we're back, Joe and Dan. I was going to just say it might be, I was going to give up on you guys, but you're back.
Yep, we're back.
Yeah. Who knows what happened there?
But it's my computer, Jerry.
We have found out that Andy is in his pajamas. That was one thing.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, God. So somebody's reporting on Andy. I don't know if he can see you, Andy. Anyway.
Well, so it's great that Andy's joined. It's we love Andy's reports on China, as we've shared with you before, Jerry. So, Andy, thanks for joining. I hope to meet you one day.
Oh, we lost you again. Andy said, I never realized the video we saw didn't wear pants. I actually had an interview with someone, and I won't say who it was because he's quite famous. And at the end of the interview, we hit the end stream, and he got up to walk away because it can be quite sleepy. You hit the end stream, and it might take 5 or 10 seconds. And he got up to walk away, and he was wearing like shorts that were made like a Hawaiian shirt. And it was still live. I know that it was a live stream, but I know that it was taken down, and then the last 2 seconds were taken off later on. But that was quite an interesting interview. It was a long time ago, so I did see that with a relatively famous person. Okay. Chinese languages are fascinating, someone says here. So there's a prize here for anyone. No, prize. You get respect. How many Chinese languages are there? Do you know, Joe?
I have no idea. But I want to add something related to multiple perspectives.
Sure.
A lot of the times, I think from the Western point of view, Chinese or Asians, they look the same on the surface. we all have similar color, we all have similar hair, but the diversity is huge. And that's one thing we're trying to get people to do, is look at the nuance on everything, because there are details there that I don't know, maybe that's how we educate it. And it's easier to just see things as I often call it 1010. But there are many other colors and nuance to things. I think if everyone do a little bit more to see things in more details and nuance, we'll be more open to accept who we are and who others are.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There
The
will be
best
a lot
way to
of
see
those
that, the best way to see that, Joe, is to travel across China, as I have done. And I know Andy has traveled widely in China, very, very much so. My understanding is there are 252 distinct languages in China. Andy says 7 families, and I guess it depends on your interpretation of what's a dialect and what's a language. Let's agree that there's lots of them. And Andy there are 56, there are 55 ethnic minorities and 1 majority inside of China. So Andy studied Chinese philology. I've studied a little bit of linguistics as well, and it's all about interpretation of what's. Many people argue, well, that's not a language, that's a dialect. That's a dialect and not a language. I come from the northeast of England, where you speak a completely different dialect to London. So it does. Yeah, let's. There are lots. Let's just say that, because it can get political. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate that. We're not going to get political tonight.
Even when you travel, Jerry.
Sorry.
When you were talking about travel, even when you travel, I think we can't assume everyone travel with the same mindset and attitude like you or we do. I know people travel with a lens that has prejudice and bias and sometimes the close-mindedness. It really depends on how you travel.
Yes. Yeah. If you go into an area, for example, last year I was in Yunnan, and Yunnan is very, very diverse. I had a lunch in a Tibetan place. I had a dinner in a Uyghur Xinjiang place, and these are in the same street. It was that kind of a place, and that's the Tibet. There's a lot of Tibetan culture, and Yunnan and Tibet are not very far apart. They're bordering each other, but they're separated by mountains. And we went for a while on the road, and all the way up, we were seeing different cultures. We traveled into the mountains, and as you're traveling through the mountains, you see these are different patterns and different cultures from the ones that we saw a little while ago. Everything is changing, and you're in an area where maybe they may be part of the same ethnic minority, but they're not part of the same culture. And if we go back 100 years, they were living only 20 kilometers apart, but it was a 2 or 3 day walk to get between these two places. And that's what created this in the past.
You know, Jerry, because this is a really great topic, and it's a slight segue, but we'll come back on track. But it's related to what we're talking about now. If you're lucky enough in your life to live in another country, well, then you are lucky enough to live in another country. If you're lucky enough to be in a relationship, to be married to a person that is not from your culture, well, then you're lucky enough to be married to a person that's not from your culture, right? But what's interesting is humans, probably from day one, have always been tribal. Tribalism exists everywhere. Tribalism exists within the same company, within the same nationality of people. So that exists. And between humans, there are fundamentals at play. So, for example, I'll give you three, and they're pretty fundamental. The first one is fear. People will often fear what they don't understand, and the best people throughout history who have intentionally designed propaganda to create enemies. They've absolutely used fear of other to create that, and there's plenty of examples of that throughout history, and that's what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's the propaganda machine from certain places within the American government that are propagating fear about China. I mean, that's happening daily. So fear. The second one is when it comes to human to human interactions and relationships independent of culture, communication. And communication is often misinterpreted as communication based on the language that you speak. But I've seen people that speak exactly the same language but don't communicate very clearly. So the implication on communication is the third thing, which is active listening. And what we found, putting fear aside, just covering communication and active listening, is that often people don't communicate very well. They don't frame things very well. They're not as careful as they should be in how they communicate. And then related to that, not only do they not communicate well, they often don't spend enough time listening. So what you get is you get a lot of miscommunication that is completely a waste of time and shouldn't need to happen. Now, what's interesting at school is school doesn't necessarily teach us how to do these things well. And so you'll notice, as an example, you'll notice when representatives from the central government, you'll watch these press conferences. I was just saying to Joe today, they're brilliant communicators. They keep the messaging really plain, and they're also very good at communicating. Now, that's not intended to be a political thing, but sometimes these things get over politicized and over complicated when they don't really need to be, because we forget actually that we're all just humans living on the same planet, and there are much bigger issues at play, like, for example, things to do with climate catastrophe that we're all losing sight of, that we shouldn't be. And that's not the only one. So, yeah.
There's a lot to be learned. As we get towards the end of this, because we said we'd do 90 minutes at the most today, I've got a specific question for you, Dan, because you're an Australian. The Premier of China, Li Qiang, has just been in Australia, and some positives came out of that. And so far, since he left Australia, all I've seen is negative press about what China is doing, what China threatens to do, what China could do. Do you think that the press, let's put the press to one side, but do you think the Australian people would benefit? And I know the answer to this is yes, but how can the Australian people benefit from a proper, friendly, good quality relationship with China?
Let's do a whole show just on that.
Okay, we'll come back to that next week.
Yeah, I mean, in probably every possible way.
Right.
I'll pick a few.
Give me a couple of examples. Yeah.
I'll give you one, and I'm not intended to be comical or facetious. Do you know how long they've been talking about a train that takes you from the central part of Melbourne to the Tullamarine Airport?
Yes.
As an example, and there are plenty of other infrastructure.
I think it's 100 years or something, isn't it?
So I'm trying really hard not to be facetious, but this is what I mean. I mean, Australia could benefit enormously just purely on a high-speed network of trains that take people anywhere around Australia that are sustainable and carbon friendly and environmental friendly and all of that.
Not
energy.
like it doesn't have the space.
Well, yeah, exactly. Renewable energy.
Hit the target faster.
Right. Affordable housing. I mean, I could keep going, but the thing is, what it requires is for Australians, not so much the Australian public necessarily, but the politicians, the people that are making these policy decisions, to be able to deal with China on equal terms. And that's a very important thing, right? On equal.
Do you see populism as being a problem there? Because right now, anybody who stands up and says, you know, let's look at the positives of China is immediately cut down.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and there's layers to this. In fact, am I getting his name right, Jerry and Joe? Warwick Powell?
Yeah.
I think Warwick just wrote a Substack article about this. It was a very good piece, which is it's talking about something to do with Australia's relationship with China, and he takes a historical view, and it's a pretty rocky view that goes all the way back. And I mean, we'll try. I'll send you the article. Maybe there's a way you can share it later.
Yeah, I've read it. I've read it. There's no need to send it to me. Warwick Powell and I are actually personal friends now. He's been on my channel 3 or 4 times, and we talk almost every day on WeChat. We're good buddies. We've never physically met yet, but we will. And he links me to pretty much everything that he writes. And we're going to be working together quite deeply in the future. Somebody put up, Francis just put up that I need to meet Dr. O. I'm not going to attempt to say Dr. O's family name. It's just, for me, that's just too difficult. But that doctor and the Duran and a couple of other people are in a group that Warwick is trying to put together, and I'm part of that group as well. So we're going to see some wider networking, and Warwick is driving that, which is a good thing. So yeah, I saw that. By the same token, I also saw Mike Pizzulo's Challenges of China article, which I've kind of kept open for a debunk later on.
Yeah, I mean, these conversations are very important. I mean, you use the word popularism, nationalism, extremism. I mean, all these things talk to narrow and at times very dangerous views.
I think when we see people have all these divisive behaviors or messages that's spreading around, we need to question their intention. Who's behind them? Who's benefiting from these propaganda?
What are they protecting?
What are they doing?
Yeah. What are they deflecting from?
Exactly.
Anne and I were having a great conversation this afternoon, and she said, "But what about?" And I said, "Unfortunately, you can't use that argument. What about?" Because when another article came out about the Uyghurifying or the Sinicization of Xinjiang today on the ABC, well, as if we need another article that just rehashes old information and provides nothing at all that's new, and it's all wrong anyway. But it just came out the day after Premier Lee left Australia. There's a very good reason for that.
Because that's the script that they will continue to follow until they're told not to.
Okay, so why is Australia, in your opinion, and Joe, you have an opinion on this as well, because I know you're very widely read. Why is Australia so influenced so strongly by the US? I guess that's the right word to ask. Why is Australia behaving this way towards its largest trading partner?
Go ahead, Joe.
It's too easy to say money is the source of a lot of these evil things happening. And I also think about these. It's almost like a magician. You do these tricks to get away from people's attention. That the Chinese people's life have been improved so much for the past 40 years. And if Australia's citizens or normal people's lives are not improving as much, it's probably a trick to distract people from seeing what's going on clearly.
The problem there, the way I view it, is it's on both sides of the parliament. So if it was the opposition doing this, I'd say, well, they're trying to deflect from whatever the government is doing. But if it was the government doing this, I'd say they're trying to deflect from their own failures. But both parties are doing it. Is there an outside influence, or is it Australia?
Definitely.
Yes.
All right.
Definitely.
So
right?
then why?
We know.
I'll offer a perspective. I think the relationship, in fact, I think it was, I hope I'm getting his name right, an ex-Singaporean minister, George Yao, who also, I think we sent you that lecture that he gave at some European institute quite, I think it was reasonably recently. Yeah. But he said to that particular forum in Europe, don't underestimate the relationship, the very deep relationship that Australia has with America, and they have had in modern history, they have had that since World War II.
Yes,
there has been, and then that started to gain more momentum. Probably roughly in the 80s, we started to see. We talked about this with you, Jerry. We started to see that through music. We started to see that through film. We started to see that through television shows already when Joe was in Australia, and you just become so immersed in it because you get this glorified view of America that you just. You don't realize that you're in the Truman Show until you exit the Truman Show.
Yes.
And then if you've never travelled and then you're bombarded with this as well, that becomes even stronger. So then, if you see someone as the White Knight, and you see them as the glorious savior, and you see them as the bastions of freedom and democracy, and at the same time you're fed a daily narrative of the enemy. This is the enemy. Be fearful of the enemy, and we're the good guys, and be fearful of the enemy, and remember we're the good guys. And then you've got the business model of propagating the military-industrial complex and protecting oil interests and things like the petrodollar, and wanting to create wherever they can the next war. And you have a willing partner in Australia who's receptive to that. Well, here we are.
But what does Australia have to lose?
When it comes to war, men and women.
With China?
Oh, to lose? With China?
Yeah.
It's a very good question. I mean, a simple response would be trade.
Yeah.
But the way that China is evolving in terms of its innovation and its technologies and its creativity, who knows what else Australia could miss out on? I mean, that's the beauty of China. We don't know what's going to be produced.
Don't know what's coming.
Because we know this. We live here, right? We both live in China, and you travel enough. I mean, you've traveled extensively. You just every time you travel, every time you get exposed to something in China, it just blows your mind. You think, how did they think of that?
Yeah, I see the issue with the Australia-China relationship that Warwick Powell said this very succinctly, actually. I'll use his words if I may. He said there's a bilateral relationship between China and Australia with a trilateral aspect to it from Australia. So Australia cannot do anything without Australia can't do anything with China without permission of the third party. Whereas China is quite open to having Australia as security with America, trade with us, no problem as long as there's no threat to us. But if there's a threat to us, why would we trade with you if you're threatening us? And America is saying, see, they're threatening you, but it's actually they are the threat. That's how I view that.
Well, people should watch a couple of really interesting films that talk about this in different ways. one way of looking at it is it's called mafia. So go out, and if you haven't seen the Oliver Stone film Wall Street, go and watch that. We spoke about that.
Yeah.
If you haven't watched Godfather 1, 2, and 3 recently, go and watch that. Now, these are both films that are explicitly and implicitly talking about models to do with protectionism. So you're either my friend or you're my enemy. It's it's quite a Western model of thinking equal to binary, black or white, and we know that's not how the Chinese operate or think. And it's hard. It's hard for Westerners to get their head around that different model of thinking. And for some Westerners or some foreigners, that scares them because it's different.
Yeah, I can understand why Australians are scared of China, why they fear the threat of China, why they think China is about. I can understand all the reasons why. I just don't believe any of them are true, but I do understand it. They are the most, seriously, the Australians are the most misinformed people on the planet about China, and that's saying something. I do believe Americans are widely misinformed, but Australians are more misinformed about China because Americans they don't see China as a threat to them. Australians do. They see China as an economic threat, but some Australians actually believe, quite a lot of Australians believe that China is going to hit Taiwan and then roll over and just hit Australia next. That's like, do you know where Australia is in relation to China? Do you know where Taiwan is? Taiwan's 130 kilometers away. Australia is 8,000.
Well, it comes back to Joe's earlier statement, maybe from about roughly 45 minutes ago or so, where she said, when we were talking about China in connection to Hong Kong, and she said even pre-handover, and she's a very smart lady, she thought to herself, why would China want to do that to Hong Kong? Why would China want to do that to Australia? And I think where a lot of that bias comes from and why people would think that way, because historically that's what all the other empires have done. And so what they do is they view incorrectly. They view China as apples to apples, another empire. And actually that makes sense why they would view China that way. But China has repeatedly said, we have no hegemonic interests. And they have.
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? That's what I get.
Exactly.
That's what I get when I say this.
Yeah,
all right, we're coming to the end of the show now, and I think it is time to say goodnight. I'm going to, because we lost your name from underneath. Make Meaningful Work is Dan and Joe in Hong Kong. And honestly, this is a really interesting book to read about sleepwalking living your life and then suddenly finding out how to do it better. And it's not just about work, although you call it work. I think maybe Make Meaningful Life might be the next book. But really, you've hit some great nails on some great heads, both in your book and tonight while talking to you. Thank you for your insights into Hong Kong, the Greater Bay Area, and the world in general. And thank you very much, everybody else who was here. We got up to 100 viewers, which was pretty good for me when I didn't promote this at all. It's just, let's see who turns up, and that's fantastic. So thanks for the questions. Thanks for everybody who joined in, and thanks, Dan and Joe. And on that happy note, let's all say goodnight.